G'day, guys, and welcome back to Survivor Worldwide right here on Reality Pop. It's a very special episode today because we are recapping the finale of Australian Survivor Blood vs. Water after 24 episodes. 21 castaways being voted out, only 3 stood at the final tribal council, and 1 ultimately reigned supreme. Mark Wales winning Australian Survivor Blood vs. Water. I'm
Unanimously.
joined by the man who called it right from the beginning, Robin. Robin, how are you?
Look, I did call it. I've never called it ever in my life, and I'm pretty happy I got one. So that's all good for me. But I'm all right. I'm okay. As you can hear, my voice is a bit weird, so I do apologise to everyone. We are getting there, but we'll talk Survivor for as long as we can.
That's right. Yeah, well, I will say in my defense, I did pick Shay, and I was ultimately 10 votes shy of a winner at the end of the day.
Yeah, you're
But
pretty good.
I think people have been down on this season, and while it has been pretty cut and dry for the most part, I think that there are some big positives to take out from this season. Obviously, I think overall some of the twists have changed. The editing hasn't improved, but we've also got some great castaways from this season,
Yeah.
and really just a masterclass from Mark from beginning to end. We will discuss toward the end, Robin. I'll give you some time to think about where Mark ultimately ranks for you as a winner. But I will say, just in the preliminary, he did play a pretty dominant game, and really, I mean, we were saying it all season, he wasn't really challenged at all, other than from his wife.
Yeah, I think Mark, on the whole, just from the get-go, understood who he was as a survivor and what he needed to do. Someone like that and I think he said it in that final jury speech when he said, everyone came up and said I'm a big threat. And I said, yeah, I know. And that made people think I was less of a threat. So I think right from that first step out there into the game, he was on and he knew what to do and he did it very, very well. So I don't know where I rank him just yet, but I'll have a think. But yeah, he was very, very switched on and knew exactly how to play the game. I mean, he's a returnee player. He didn't make any of his same mistakes as the first season, but yeah, very, very solid gameplay by him.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, we before we get to Mark and really dive deep into his game, and we will also have an Australian Survivor Blood vs. Water retrospective, possibly invite some fans for a roundtable discussion about the season and our overall thoughts,
Right.
probably in a couple of weeks. And of course, as I said, I have been talking to some castaways from this season, and we should hopefully have some deep dive interviews coming up. I will say off the top, we know we promised you guys the King of the Jungle. Unfortunately, we couldn't just line up our dates at the end of the day, but hopefully we can get the King back on the podcast at some stage in the future. But certainly
you're stuck with us. You're stuck with us today.
At least I'm repping if I move my mic out of the way.
Yeah, creeping.
I'm repping the creeping merch. Which, by the way, I will give Luke a plug. I think he's closing down his store at the moment, so definitely check out his socials if you do want to get your hands on some creepy merch. So I think he's starting to run out and beginning to close the store. But episode 23, we start out obviously on Sunday night with five players remaining in the game. Of course, we had Mark and Josh and the 3 girls, Chrissy, KJ, and Shay. And it looked like early on here, Robin, that Shay would be the next one to go because Mark and Josh were really, really concerned that Shay is going to be able to dominate in these endurance challenges towards the end. We saw it last season with Hayley Leak really dominating at the end. And I think that was the concern with Shay for them, and really wanted to make sure that if Shay doesn't win immunity, she's got to go home.
Yeah, and that was, again, that's a great play by the 2 chaps there because straight off the bat, I think we mentioned it last week, the girls should have really been banding together. They really should have. And this was a moment, whether Shay won or didn't win, it really should have been a straightforward vote. If it was Mark or Josh that won, the other one really should have gone home straight off the bat. And it's strange that they, like, Chrissy wasn't ready to make that jump until that last moment, that last vote. And ultimately, them not banding together does cost one of them half a mil. And so, yeah, it's just great by the guys for just going, Shay's too much of a threat. Like, this is, again, Mark, who is the biggest threat in the game, is still managing to make other people look much bigger. Shay. Maybe, like you said, the thing about Hayley doing the same thing last time. Maybe that's what he's done, and they fell for it.
That's right. And
And
I
then they
mean,
went for KJ.
yeah, and we'll discuss that once we get to the vote, because I do think there's certainly some great mastermind play by Mark and Josh there, really to try and convince Chrissy
Mm.
especially to try and change her vote. And we will discuss that. But of course, Shay kept herself safe in an epic challenge, Motion, which we always see. It first appeared in Survivor Token Chains in the US. One of my favorite
It's a great
challenges,
challenge.
I will say, it's always been one that I would love to play.
Yeah.
I'd love to figure out a way to create a backyard course, but I think it's a little bit difficult, especially when you're trying to have the tracks change like you do in the original US version. But the
Yeah.
way we've seen Australian
It's a
Survivor do
great
it,
challenge.
the way we've seen Australian Survivor do it is so much more epic. Of course, they make sure you have this massive staircase. You really need to run for this one, and it was a pretty close challenge for a while there. Josh and
Yeah.
Chrissy evidently really wanted to make sure they were spaced out at the same time, but it backfired for them both, which was
Yeah. And I think
unfortunate to see.
the best part about this challenge is it's always at the end that yes, it takes a bit of endurance because we've got the running element, but regardless of that, it's that concentration that you do not have after 47 days out there, that you've just got to stay so sharp. And when you place that ball and one wrong move, you're done. I had this spacing, and then for some unknown reason, they just put it one after the other. But that's because mental fatigue. It's such a great challenge.
Yeah, that's right, and absolutely, that is what it comes down to ultimately. Managing the gaps in between the balls is what it all comes down to, and that mental fatigue, especially at what were we at that point? Day 45, I think it was, or around there. It really would be taking a toll on you at that point. Trying to
Mm,
keep track of all these different balls going here, there, and everywhere.
love
And
it.
ultimately, in the end, Shay was the one that was obviously feared would win the challenge,
Yeah,
and unfortunately for
yeah,
Mark and Josh, the number one target came off the block there.
yeah. And again, just it is such fun. It's like I'm with you. I want to play that game. I want to challenge so much. But yeah, their ultimate target goes, and what happens is they manage to keep themselves off the chopping block. I
Mm.
That just baffles me. That just there's a skillful play to just not be recognized. Once Shay dominates that moment, can win. That's it. Like that, one of them should have done. They masterfully don't even codes. Yeah, I think it was all no. What happened? It was a split. Was
Yeah,
a lack
so
of communication from the girls.
so first of
Just
all, what
gonna
happened, of
take the
course,
camera off every seconds, man. But keep talking.
all all good, not a problem. Yeah, so of course, what happened at the very beginning of this week, we did see Josh and Mark, of course, initially had their target pointed to Shay, and really it was a question for them. Josh wanting to stick strong with Mark ultimately and make sure they went to the end together, and
Mm,
knowing that those two would be the biggest targets if it came to tribal council. They had to get rid of one of the girls at this point, and they needed to make sure whatever they could to really keep themselves off the chopping block. And as you alluded to there, master play by Mark, I think. Really, really brilliant play. And I don't think a lot of people would have the perception to actually think at that level, knowing your back's against the wall. Probably what I'd do, I'd just throw Josh under the bus and say, hey, he's the bigger threat, get him out of the game. And I'd hope, fingers crossed, that I can win the next challenge. But for
yeah.
Mark, what he did, of course, he steered Chrissy, and Josh did a great job at steering Chrissy as well in trying to
Hmm.
make sure that Chrissy was a little bit confused, so that they could hopefully split
Yeah.
the votes and then convince on the revote them to get rid of KJ. A very clever plan.
Oh, it's actually rude, and so just highlights the lack of communication there for girls to be make sure they're on the same page at that element of not really knowing what Chrissy was seeing at the start, having to get from being with a backend, which I'm all having a backhand and getting back on board. But that's that next layer of fusion that Matt planned by we have that of KJ and Josh, was it? J and Josh? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and doesn't want Josh or Chrissy Mark to go. This is such a thing. Like, it must have been purely communication. It's read by Jay and Shay. She's not going to be us. Because in these situations, you are that person. You allow a wing person to be, okay, which one do you want to go? Out of the two of them, which one is it? And if she wants Mark, you go Mark. She
Mm.
doesn't want Josh. So, yeah, it was really great to have like that confusion happening there by Chrissy is just well done by the boys to keep talking to her, and just unfortunately a downside from the girls who should have really walked all over that challenge or walked over that vote.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it would have been smarter for KJ and Shay at least to put their votes on Mark because they know that Chrissy and Josh are this unbreakable pair. And
Mm,
ultimately, if they can try and get the girls to lobby together, it's going to give them more strength going into that final three, regardless. And
yeah,
I think Mark would have been the smarter option for KJ and Shay, but obviously they're a little bit misguided in thinking that Josh
yeah,
was the bigger threat. And ultimately, I think, Chrissy was so close to Josh that it was the logical decision for her.
mm,
And honestly, I don't blame Chrissy. We saw her really grapple with
no,
in the next episode, of course, having to get rid of her closest ally in the game.
yeah,
But for Chrissy, it was a tough decision for her to make. But honestly, in her defense, I will say it was the best move to get rid of KJ, knowing that she would have a better chance of taking Josh to the end and trying to remain loyal to the end.
yeah. Once that split happened, yeah, it was her best move there.
Mm,
However, if she ever gets to play again, if she ever decides to play again, she'll be much better for the run now that she understands the game a bit more. After making it to the end, uh, even though I would have taken her to the end myself, I would have loved to go up against
yeah,
Chrissy because
yeah,
I think she's an easy beat. But you've got to give her a little bit of credit to go. Someone who didn't know the game has got there on the end, got there right to the yes. She didn't get any votes, but that's a commendable effort to just first time round having literally no idea what you're doing, and hopefully she's taken that lesson of what, it's not the heart and the head thing. You know what? The heart actually should be you winning the money for your family. And
mm.
these friendships, that's, hopefully she's better for it if she ever does come back to play again.
Yeah, and I think Chrissy is definitely one of the names from this season that is probably on the
Hmm.
top of the list of not only producers but also the fans to come back because she really has been a massive fan favorite this season. And I will say
Yeah.
for Chrissy, of course, it was Croc's bucket list moment to come on Survivor.
Hmm.
She, of course, came along for the ride and did great for it. I will say the same for David as well. He also came onto the show and quickly learned how to adapt,
Yes,
especially
agree.
after the
Yeah.
merge toward his downfall. He was really, really playing hard and doing his best, which is great to see. I mean, to come
Yeah.
onto this show, we love seeing that journey that everyone has, and I think Chrissy's journey is definitely one of the
Yeah.
better journeys we've seen throughout Australian Survivor. And dare I say that if there was to be someone that got votes, I think that Chrissy may have actually been the one to get one or two votes over Shay. If there was some people wavering from
Mm.
Mark, I think she probably would have ended up in second position. Had you asked the
Yeah.
jury who
Yeah.
was the second best.
Yeah, I kind of agree there. I think she might have had a better chance with Josh as well to get a couple of
Yep.
votes, um, more than anything else. Yeah, it's hard. Like again, Shay just unfortunately didn't have anything left over, and Chrissy, she did have a great journey, and that's what you want from someone who doesn't know the game. Like I think if I was, yeah, she was so fun to watch, and especially in those early days where she didn't know a thing. And I think
Mm,
that's, if we're going to take one thing, like if we're going to take a couple of things out of this season that were positives, because I guess the consensus across the board is it's a lower season. Watching her journey is real, and Dave's journey, and watching them learn how to play is actually enjoyable. It's watching that growth. You don't want, you'd probably know because you've got a better memory than me, but which I think it was one of the Australian champs versus contenders where one of our champions was just there laying down on the rocks the whole time, never doing anything, and obviously but you didn't see her. Um, you want
Monica
someone who's going to
from
play.
the
My,
Monica the Miss Universe.
yes, yes, just was doing nothing, and it's like,
Yeah.
what? At least they got in and played, and yes, they didn't know what they were doing, but you know what? They learned, and they got to the end, and Chrissy did amazing. I really enjoyed watching her for that's the sort of player who doesn't know the game that I want. I don't want what I think was Andrew from last season. I don't want him. The
Mm.
Daves and the Chrissies who actually are going to learn and play and not be caught up in the honor. They played, and yeah, rightly so. I think that's a nice thing to take away from this season for sure.
Yeah, that's right. I think with this season especially, with it being Blood vs. Water, those people who hadn't watched the show, knowing that their loved ones' dreams have been extinguished, and it was
Mm,
their dream to come onto the show, carrying that flame for them, I really do think it gave that encouragement to just play all that much harder. And yeah, I will give my hats off to Chrissy, and we'll certainly discuss her final tribal council pitch at the end
mm,
once we get into
mhm.
that. Shmong here saying Chrissy deserved at least one vote because she really played well, considering she knew nothing about the show. But Mark also deserved to get all the votes. And yeah, I absolutely agree. I will say
Yeah,
Shay deserved some votes as well. I've seen people being harsh on her on
yeah.
social
We'll
media
probably
for
talk
ranking
about
her
that.
game an 8.5.
Yeah.
Um, but honestly, when I think it was Mel and Michelle, I still haven't learned the difference as to which is which, unfortunately. Um, but I think they asked the question, where do you rank your game from 1 to 10? And when I was watching it, I said I'd give her game an 8, is what I would say.
Okay.
And that's exactly what she gave herself, an 8.5. And
Yeah.
if I was Shay pitching at the end, I probably would have said I played a 9.5 game because you want to lift your game as much as possible and try and convince the
Mm,
jury that there were no mistakes in your game. But I
yeah.
I, I
I,
think I
I,
think Shay received a lot of flack, which I don't like seeing. And of course, we didn't see much from her at Final Tribal Council as well, which was
no.
a bit unfortunate for
There's
that to be left out of the edit. And it was the same last season with George as well, not getting too much time for his pitch
Did
on
you see?
Final Tribal.
I read something. I read something today regarding. I think Shay put it up on her Instagram about how a lot of the didn't see just because the jury was apparently really, really vicious to a Chrissy and a Shay. So it must have been a really hideous tribal by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I've just got it up in another tab. So what I will do is I'll pull it up. Um, let's see, Google Chrome. All right. Well, it
Yeah,
wants me to
it sounded
restart
pretty
before I can do it.
nasty.
Anyway, yeah, I think it is always a question, and we don't see that. I can't pull it up on my screen, unfortunately, but I will read out
Oh,
Shay's Instagram post. She says, "First things first, congrats, Mark. Your pitch and game were unbeatable, and of course, definitely deserving of that. Chrissy, we got as far as you can get." In the game, something to be proud of. My inbox is flooded with why didn't you get asked many questions by the jury? To which my answer is there probably wasn't much for producers to keep in the edit as it was rather brutal. Chrissy and I were called goats in a really negative light. Cheers, Jesse. When I would answer their questions, the males in the jury would interrupt with, but what big moves did you make? So I just sat there and copped it, realized my journey of fighting from the bottom and not having a majority alliance to rely on wasn't what they wanted to hear. Not highlighting the men on purpose here, but every female acted with grace and kindness. And I had a problem. I mean, I'm not the biggest I'm not the biggest fan of this whole Survivor resume. Um,
mhm,
being
mhm.
being the focus of the game. Not my biggest my biggest favorite Survivor catchphrase, I suppose. I do respect a social game at the end of the day, and it's it all comes down to what the jury favor. Um, which in this season they obviously favored big moves, and I think Geordie, Jesse, and Sam were probably the three players really spearheading
The big
that
movers.
as massive fans of the game.
Well, I think what we have here though is like always going to respect. I personally love a physical player. I've always loved a physical player. I mean, I'm loving Jonathan on Survivor 42.
Yeah,
Always love them. The social, like I Shawnee. I love a social player as well. But I think where they fall short is you have three pillars. Social, strategic. There it is from Shay. Yeah, it's a bit brutal. Um,
Hmm.
but when you're only pushing one, Chrissy's only doing social, Shay's only doing physical. You need to at least, I always think you need to at least have two pillars as far as your pitch goes. I wouldn't rate Shay's game an 8. She started off great, but she started off great because she's that physical beast. She, I don't buy the fact that when you're on the bottom you can't do anything. I don't buy that. You survive. It's like Jesse, Geordie did stuff. It took him a while, and obviously Australian Survivor is a little bit harder to maneuver because of this whole loyalty thing. But yeah, it's just I think the problem with all this stuff that we're seeing there, I just don't like this. I don't like how we switch the format. I like the simple question and answer. I don't like the debates. I feel that's
Yeah.
kind of changed that final
Yeah,
tribal.
and that changed in Survivor Co. Wrong, if I'm correct, after Michelle
Hmm.
won instead of Aubrey, and they decided that it would be better to have that open dialogue, and I think at times it's good, but
Yeah,
ultimately, you don't get to see everyone's final pitch. I think that was one of the great things about US Survivor is even if it was just a trivial question like Greg Bioris in Borneo asking, pick a number between 1 to 10.
yeah,
Kelly Goldsmith did the same in Africa, and you often have people that said, I don't want to ask a question. I just want to say, you're stupid. I'm not going to vote for you. I feel like even though, it can be disingenuous at times and not as helpful to the dialogue, I feel like it's better for each individual jury member to get their transgressions out towards the players on trial.
hmm,
And to actually put them to task as opposed to this, as opposed to this round table where the loudest voices ultimately steer the conversation and drown out everyone else,
yeah,
which I think
yeah.
is a shame about the current jury format. And I think that's the same in US Survivor as well.
Yeah, it's like because I like to see everyone's thought, even if they don't have a good thought. But once you get we're going to discuss the social, we're going to start to touch on the physical, and now the strategic elements. I just think that that slows things down a little bit.
Mm,
I really feel like I want to see everyone. There was some people in that tribal final jury we didn't actually bloody see. We didn't see them say
yeah,
anything. I'm probably guessing we didn't really see one of the twins. We only saw the other one,
yeah,
which is standard for those two girls. But it's like it just, yeah, and not happy with how they've changed that. I wish we kept it. I was really liking that we kept it a bit old school. I don't mind the discussion, but it just doesn't lead for a good edit. It doesn't lead for it at all.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shmong saying Shay's game was good at first, but close to the end, she was just there. Although she did win those last two immunity challenges, which was certainly good for Shay's game. When you're at the bottom, you can do
But
anything you
that's
want
only the
because you've
one
got nothing to
thing.
lose. Shay didn't even try, and I don't think I think she did. She was in that group with Geordie and the like. So I think in the end, Chrissy just unfortunately got her wires crossed a little bit, which is what we saw throughout the game. Mark Green with Shay's game towards the end there. Chris's
Howdy,
pitch was
Mark.
very
How
good.
you going, mate?
I I Mark, do you?
I do know Mark. I do know Mark. He's a good mate
There
of
you go.
mine.
Well, welcome to the chat, Mark. And yeah, I think we haven't seen Mark on the chat before. Always great to see.
He's
Marcus
always lurking.
Evans.
He's always lurking in the background.
Yeah. Marcus Evans. I know Chrissy broke down in tears in one of her exit interviews that it was a lot worse than what was shown, and she was surprised by how good her pitch was shown on TV, etc. And honestly, that was the first I'd actually heard about the juries being very negative, which is it's
Mm,
disappointing to hear, but it's every season has a different jury, which is disappointing. You get your juries like Survivor Samoa, where they're really ripped into Russell, of course, and I
of
don't blame
course.
them for doing so because Russell played a very ruthless game, especially for the
Brutal,
time.
brutal game.
But yeah, I think a social game is very respectable. Mark saying Chrissy and Shay were goats, but yes, Chrissy's pitch totally surprised me. It was very good. And yeah, Mark saying
Chrissy did
again,
do a good pitch.
only Michelle spoke in
She
Final Tribal, not Mel. That's right. Yeah, Michelle was the one that
who
asked
said
Shay to rank her game
better game. Yeah,
between 1 to
yeah,
10. There,
yeah.
and we will come back to that. I just want to quickly touch on the final immunity challenge and also Josh being voted out as well. Of course, the final immunity challenge
Hmm, hmm.
this season in an Australian Survivor in true fashion. It was an endurance challenge. All the castaways got the chance to call their family, which was nice to see. Normally, we see
Yeah,
them actually attend
on
the final challenge. But in this season, of course, with COVID and the like, all they could get was a call, which was still nice to see. And again, I got to praise Chrissy. She really gave it her all in that challenge. An hour and a half in that challenge is fantastic. Robin needs to get on the show. I do wonder, Robin, how would you last in that waterfall
right
challenge?
now, right now after this surgery of my hernia and my abs, I can't walk. I wouldn't last. Right now, I think I need a year of recovery to get back in it. But yeah, Chrissy put up an amazing fight for that challenge. She put up an amazing fight. And again, that's something like I've enjoyed Chrissy's journey. This challenge wasn't like it wasn't the big like last season we had the crunching spike things. It didn't look like as painful, but of course it's a core challenge. It's a super hard endurance challenge. Always a bit of fun, but again, built for Shay. And that's again goes into you can rate Shay a bit higher than I probably would rate her. And I love that she competed and won those last two back-to-back things, but she just didn't have anything else. She didn't have a punch to go with that, with her immunity awards, and she obviously dominated those last two challenges and started to go on a bit of a roll. Which, once Geordie was out of the game, because Geordie seemed to be her main competition, Shay should have cleaned up, and she did. It's just unfortunate that she didn't have anything else to back herself up with.
Yeah, Shmong saying again, the challenge was Shay's to lose. There was no way Chrissy would have won that, but she tried. Yeah, definitely. I don't think we got down to the final bar, did we? In the end,
No,
that would have been very brutal. And
Mhm.
I sound like a bit of a sadist to say this, but I would have liked to have seen a rule where they have to have both hands on the bar at all times.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it would have been a lot tougher, and also make the intervals a lot quicker, because it seemed like for a
yeah,
while there we were really standing up, basically just holding on to two bars, and they were just rotating hands
yeah,
for about an hour,
yeah.
really, before they moved anywhere. I know I'm sitting on the couch. I wasn't I wasn't there, but it just from what I saw on the TV, it didn't seem as tough as what we've seen in former seasons. But after
Yeah,
47 days, of
we
course, it's going to be challenging regardless. After
of course,
47
of course,
days.
but I'm with you. I feel like what we need is that's what we seem to have been doing is this challenge that's going to last 6 hours. These really long, stupid challenges, and this one was like an hour and a half. This one was a challenge that they would do throughout, like early on, for an individual
Mm.
immunity. So it wasn't the big epic that Australian Survivor has really been pitching these last few seasons. Of the stand on the rock all night. Now have this crunching machine holding you up. It's like these challenges that last forever. This one wasn't that. So it wasn't the big epic finale challenge that we're here to expect as well, which was I was a little bit disappointed on.
Yeah, but regardless, the first time we ever had a final three in Australian Survivor, which certainly spiced things up. And I was half expecting at Tribal Council Jono to say, "Don't worry, guys, we're going to a fire making challenge." But ultimately, in the end, it wasn't a fire making challenge. Of course, Josh was the one that ended up going home. Chrissy ultimately
Hmm.
having to stab him in the back after realizing that Josh was going after Chrissy as well. Um, Mark and Josh's discussion there. We do need to touch on this because it is, of course, brought up at the final tribal council. Um,
Hmm.
Josh asks Mark to, work with him to vote out Chrissy, ultimately thinking that they can work together and duke it out at the end. And on Josh's part, I think this is a massive misread. If you get the opportunity to take out another alpha male, especially seeing how ruthless and duplicitous he's been throughout the game, lying about that second idol, which I don't blame Mark for. Of course, that's what you're going to do when Geordie has, revealed himself to be two-faced throughout the game.
Hmm.
But when you're working with someone as duplicitous as that, and there's $500,000 on the line, um, if I'm playing the game, I'd definitely be pointing my gun at Mark and
Yeah,
trying to get him
you
out,
want the
because
challenges out of
I
here.
I, I would prefer a 70-30 chance of winning the $500,000 than a 50-50 against Mark. I think it
Yeah.
is while I respect Josh's rationale behind it, ultimately I think it's just the wrong thing to be doing when there's 500K on the line.
Yeah, I like the concept. I like what he tried to do, but it wasn't. I mean, when those two are the biggest threats in the game that are going to win the game, you want to take out the other person. It's
Mm,
it's standard. It's just what he should have done, and I feel like that important element there of going, hang on a second, Mark is my competition. Let me go against him. I want to get rid of him. This is like I get what he tried to do, but it was a bit of a misstep ultimately. And,
yeah.
and again, great for Mark to sit there and go, great idea. That's a great idea. We're going to do that. And knowing full well that that is a stupid idea. And I'm never going to do that because why do I want to sit next to you?
Yeah, that's right. And for Schmong here saying Mark was really good at himself, looking like he's not a big player. I am really interested to chat with Shay and Chrissy after this season, of course,
Mm.
and get their thoughts on why they thought to bring Mark to the final tribal council as opposed to Josh. Of course, Tionyage here, pointing out Josh really was under-edited though, and I personally thought he played one of the best games this season. I will agree with that, but from what we saw in the edit, of course, he was the Mark Whale show at the end of the day. He was the the hero of the season, the one that was driving the vote all the way. But I am interested to know why it was, why Josh was seen as a bigger threat at the end than Mark was.
So I don't believe Josh played an amazing game. I believe Josh played a safe game. Josh played a game of being in the majority and enjoyed it. And it felt like he didn't understand where, like he could have taken out Mark a long time ago. There was moments for him to take out Mark. There was moments for him to actually play the game, and I don't think he did. I think he just cruised along. So, and great. Maybe that's a good position. And maybe he did play a great game for getting into space where he could cruise along. But I also think Mark put him there. I think Mark made Josh look better than he actually is.
Look, I will say there are elements of that I agree with. I think Josh played a smart and safe game, conservative game up until probably after Purgatory and after those Purgatory 3 returned to the game. Then he started to make his moves, which I honestly think isn't the worst thing at the end of the day. To be a part of that motion, to try and help Geordie to gain a little bit more of a majority within the game, to try and choose his way out, to be someone that's at the end there with Mark and Chrissy and climb his way up the totem pole a little bit. I thought his game had merit. I will say it definitely wasn't well beaten from what we saw, because you're right, he was a part of that alliance the whole way through. But I think a lot of that comes down to the edit as well. We didn't see who was leading that formidable 6, but it seemed like for most of the game, a lot of people were believing that Josh was the one that was leading that formidable 6 alliance.
But if you can even go back, pre-merge, and I think Geordie did another thing where said the same thing, that I want Josh to be the fall guy. I want Josh to be the leader. A lot of people seem to want to push this. Josh, this pretty pilot man, smart, very put him as the leader, and that's been a thing that they did the whole way through. So not that he played a terrible game. I just some of his reactions, like when Jordan went and how angry he was, and how that emotional play and not thinking with a clear head. I'm going to go to sleep. I woke up the next day. I'm still angry about it. There's elements that I see in his game that were just from the edit, of course, that I just think I'd give him a B. It's not a great, just an average good game sitting in a strong alliance for me.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And with the edit we got as well, it's hard to tell exactly what happened. And now that the season is over, and we'll start to hear some deep dives. And as I alluded to, we'll try and get some of those castaways on the channel. Hopefully, we should have some locked in. So it'll be great to hear their thoughts on what ultimately happened, because I know from last season as well, from speaking with a lot of players on Brains vs Brawn, there was so much that wasn't shown, and so many votes that had a narrative told about them which was completely different to what happened. And I know Australian Survivor especially is guilty of changing the narrative to suit really their hero or their main character at the end of the day, which is unfortunate.
I would love to see more Josh.
But it's absolutely. I'd love to see Josh. And again, we said that with Chrissy before. I think Chrissy is definitely high up on production's list to bring back. I think Josh as well, in a couple of seasons' time, will likely be a candidate that will come back. Once he is, obviously he's got his child on the way. But in the future, that could be something that if he's open to it, I think it'd be great to see him come back. And dare I say, he would probably be someone that could improve on a second chance. And
he definitely would improve for sure. Yeah. I feel like he's learned a bit again. Like, obviously, we didn't see enough of him. Didn't see enough of him for me to go, yes, I need to see him back again. Unfortunately, the edit doesn't give me that. There were moments that I actually enjoyed him, but I think that element of when going through that run, he will be better for it if he does get to play again.
Yeah, and Shmong here saying, I think Josh is made to believe that he's a leader. His game was not as good as he thought, but most players were just banking on him looking like a bigger threat than he was. His game wasn't too bad, though. I'm assuming you're saying wasn't too bad or was too bad. I'm not sure.
It wasn't too bad. It's just not I wouldn't say he had an amazing game, but it wasn't too bad. And I think he was shown to be, like, people made him the golden boy. People made him his shield, and Mark talks about that. I know Geordie talked about it pre-merge. So that's where it's an okay game. It's an okay game. It's not a terrible game. He got pretty far. I mean, if I ever got the chance to play, yes, I want to win. But God, if I could go that far in the game, I'd be wrapped. You know, so
Yeah.
he's done a good job. I'm just a bit more harsh, I guess.
That's what we're here for. We're here to criticize all the castaways and make them feel terrible for the moves they made. But no, we'll jump
didn't make.
right into the final tribal council. Of course, we've nibbled around the edges a little bit with final tribal council already. But really, look at. I mean, as we've seen from Shay's Instagram post, which we pulled up before, it was a very bitter jury. They were very harsh and favouring those big moves, which ultimately really served Mark. And, as I said, I do think Geordie, Josh, and in particular Sam were the ones that were really spearheading that movement for Mark to win. And really, he was against... I won't say no competition. I won't say they were goats, but it was certainly mega competition because, Shay and Chrissy, they didn't have the best arguments to come up against him, to be honest.
Yeah, look, I've seen Chrissy as a goat the whole season. She's a likable person, but she has nothing to back it up. And I don't think you can just give $500,000 to someone who you like. So I've always seen her as a goat, and a very enjoyable, pleasant, lovely goat. Not a goat like she's very, very lovely, and I would have taken her to the end. Shay, I wouldn't just because she was more physical and she had, that element, her storyline of wanting to that under the underdog fighting for her life. That element can give you a bit of pull. However, she just didn't do. I don't know if I guess they're both in the grand scheme of things. The three of them. The three girls probably wouldn't have been goats if they managed to get rid of the guys, but they didn't. And no matter out of those three girls, all three of them would have been considered goats, unfortunately.
Who would you have voted for if it was a final tribal council of the three girls, being KJ, Chrissy, and Shay?
It's a really hard one because I don't think that Chrissy stayed in the majority. So she had a good run. KJ and Shay were both voted out. They both seem to. I'm sorry, this is going to sound hideous. It's not mean to sound like this, but they both cried, "Woe me! We're at the bottom. We can't do anything," which I completely disagree with. So I probably would have sided. Unfortunately, I would have sided towards Chrissy. I mean, Shay's won immunities, but she hasn't really made a move. KJ made a move because she was lucky enough to be gifted a great move to shake up the game, thankfully, with that twist. But she was like, I've been trying to play the game, but no one wants to play with me. And I think I'd probably go Chrissy, unfortunately. It's a I don't know why. I don't really rate any of their games.
I think it would have been a very close final tribal council. Honestly, I would have given it to Shay, purely because from what we saw at final tribal council, I think Shay had the better pitch, honestly. I think a lot of the jury were more physical players and they would have respected that. She sort of pitched herself as the underdog who fought her way back time and time again, was at the bottom and did everything she could to survive, winning four immunity challenges and all that. But Chrissy, again, I think Chrissy gave a great speech. And I think that would be almost a Dom and Wendell situation where you could have a very close, even a 5-5 vote. And it might even come down to KJ.
Yeah.
But Chrissy's final...
I was going to say, I think what would have determined who I'd win was how they got rid of the two boys and who controlled getting rid of the two boys. I think that would have changed. I think I needed to see if Shay does that move or KJ that move or Chrissy does that move and is really strong with that. I think that would have been where my vote would have gone for those two boys to be removed.
And I think that probably would have been... I feel like it would have been KJ spearheading the strategy, but Chrissy ultimately being the swing vote who would have to betray the boys. And I think for that matter, Chrissy could get some credit from the jury. Tioni here saying, was I the only one who thought Shay didn't play well at all? Like the sheer fact she was voted off and needed immunities at so many points within the game isn't great. Look, Robin agrees with you there. So no, you're not alone. I mean, I'm one of the Shay stands from day one, so I'm always going to back Shay.
Yeah. I like Shay. And the other element of needing the immunities, I don't agree with that comment because sometimes you are on the bottom. However, her pitch of being the underdog, she was the underdog after Geordie was the underdog, so Geordie was the overall underdog. So it's a hard pitch to sell. I was the underdog when actually no, Geordie was. Geordie had to fight for his life more than you did because Geordie was target number one. So I just, sometimes you got it. Sometimes you're in a position to win immunities. It's just what you do. I mean, even the fact that she won these immunities, and at some points in time, you often see when someone wins immunity, they always go, "I've now got the control," which is incorrect. But at least they're thinking, "I have a bit of power to push and move." Not once did we see Shay go, "I have this now. I can try and dictate where I want the game to go." I think we ended up getting Mark and Josh going to Chrissy going, "You're the one in control here. You're the one with the power," where Shay's wearing the necklace.
Yeah, I think it always was going to be tough for Shay to come back and make a claim for herself. I think she did the best with what she had against the jury she had. But I got to give props to Chrissy here for her final tribal council pitch. And you did allude to this before, Robin. Of course, she really did hammer home the social aspect of the game. Of course, she said, it wasn't her dream to be here on Survivor. It was, of course, Croc's dream to come out here and play the game as hard as he could. Ultimately, though, she had to turn her back on Croc and find her own way through the game. And she did ride with that majority for the majority of the game. But in the end, she had to test her loyalty with Josh, and she gave Josh credit for getting her there to the end. But, it all came down to her stabbing her closest ally in the back and finding herself at final tribal council. I think for Chrissy, though, she didn't realize what it took until too late, until day 46. I think it's when she realized
too late.
That's what it takes to win the game. Honestly, I don't think she would have had the. She could have taken out Josh and Mark, but even then, I think Josh and Mark probably, whoever remains out of that, can still probably finagle their way to the end somehow. Honestly, if it came down to that.
Yeah, she had opportunities to play, but kept playing this strong six. Again, that's someone who doesn't understand the game. Like you said, it finally clicked at the last vote for her. Now, too little, too late. And she said, "This is my big move to vote her out." And one thing I do want to touch on is this always bothers me a lot from a jury in the final speech. We have Josh sit there and have a bit of a crack at Chrissy for voting him out. But if it went your way, you were the one voting Chrissy out. And people often, they get so, I hate that slight bitterness. We're like, you just got outplayed. You had an idea to get this person out. And now you're sitting there going, "Hey, we were loyal. We were here. It was you and I at the very end." Mate, you were trying to get rid of it. You just lost that vote. I hate that. I hate when a jury member comes in and has a bit of a cry that they're not sitting there and the other person is, yet they were the ones trying to vote that person out. That bothers me so much.
Yeah, you got some agreement there. I'm assuming that's referring to your take on Shay. Tiona there, agreeing with you on that one. Especially when Josh voted her too.
Exactly.
For Chrissy. For Chrissy, it was the best move for her to stab Josh in the back at the end. And that's ultimately what got her to the end. I do want to throw a hypothetical out there because if let's say that Shay, KJ, and Chrissy stick together, they target Mark or Josh. They get rid of one of the two at the final 5. Okay, so it's the 3 females and then the one guy, either Mark or Josh. If I'm Mark or Josh, I plead to Chrissy's loyalty to her guilt at the end of the day of being a loyal person, a mum, and someone who doesn't know the game as well. I try and force that split vote, which I think is what the guys would ultimately try to do. Try and force a split vote and send it to fire. Put the votes on someone like KJ, who would probably be the only option, assuming Shay still wins immunity. KJ versus Mark or Josh in fire. That would have been the way to get out of that situation. So I honestly, and I think that would have happened no matter what. I do think Chrissy would have seen that and said, "You know what, I am going to honor my loyalty because that's what I stand for in the game. I don't want to stab everyone in the back all the way to the end." I honestly would see that happening if it came down to it, but ultimately for Chrissy, it didn't. Chrissy and Shay overall. So you said Chrissy would have been your second pick, and Shay would have been third out of the final tribal council. Of course, you would have voted Mark, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I voted Mark from day one, from episode 1. He just played very, very smart. I just can't get over how someone as physically imposing, a returnee, had two idols, even though they didn't believe him till it got flushed. But they did believe he had one idol, won a couple of individual immunities, was in a majority. Everything about him should have screamed, vote this guy out long before merge. Long before merge. So amazing there. But for the other two, it is hard. I think I give it to Chrissy again because Shay came back into the game. She was voted out. Chrissy was never voted out. Yes, Chrissy was probably more of the easy goat to take to the end and didn't have to fight to stay in the game. But I think, unfortunately for me, Shay just did nothing with her opportunities. Shay won the immunities that she won near the end, but she didn't really do anything for me to go, you deserve, you lucked back into the game because you were voted out and you got the twist that kept you in. And I'm not against that. Obviously, I really wanted Hayley to win last year. I thought Hayley was by far the best player. So I was happy she won. So I'm not against someone coming back in, but if you come back in, you got to play the game. And I just think the game isn't just, as much as I love physical challenges, the game isn't just about the challenges. And I think that's why I'd have to give it to Chrissy.
Yeah, fair
strangely
enough.
enough.
And no, I would say Shay 2, Chrissy 3, purely because I'd value her pitch more so over Chrissy's. Although I don't think Chrissy's final tribal council speech was a slouch at all. I think she did a great job at pitching herself. And I do think, as we said, if she came back for a second time, she could drastically improve and really be a dark horse to take it all out. Shmong here saying exactly what I was thinking. After Nina left, I was all for Sam and Mark. And I want to bring up this scenario. If Nina doesn't get medically evacuated, you got to think about it this way. Nina's alliance were the ones that got all the way to the end. We were all crying tears. And I know a lot of fans, unfortunately, stopped watching the season, which was very sad because I do think there were great moments throughout the merge and into the end game. But if Nina made it past that medical evacuation, she hadn't been medically evacuated, I think we probably would be seeing Nina at the end, just based off, the way things played out with her majority alliance. And things would have been so much more entertaining. But regardless, for Mark to play such a dominant game, I've got to take my hat off to him. The second player after Pierre to win unanimously in Australian Survivor, but the first player to win with a 10-0-0 vote at the final tribal council.
And I was, I'm definitely all about Nina. I'm so sad she wasn't there. I would have wanted her to win. I was all team Nina, big fan. But it is hugely dominant by Mark, hugely dominant, and that's why I think it should have been 10-zip. I mean, and then we've gone. I think we talked about, because you were like, oh, we might have a final three last week, and I was like, I don't really like the final three. But you were like, hey, we have that final three to potentially not have the 10-zip vote or the 9-zip vote. And this is what we end up getting anyway. Because he was so dominant. He was just, it might not be the most entertaining game to watch. He's no Dave. So of course, but you know what? It was a masterclass of just understanding who he is in the game and what he needs to do. It's just really, really good. And the fact, like, even if he took Josh would get some votes, but even the fact that I made you the boss, mate. I made you the leader. Everything you were is because I was pulling the strings. Very, very clever game.
I think Josh, if he made it to the end, probably will get 2 votes from Jordan and Chrissy, assuming she was on the jury. Other than that, I still think it'll all go towards Mark. And
Mark played a much better game.
You just compared him. You didn't compare him, but you said he's not quite David, of course, in how entertaining he is, but he certainly was just as dominant as David. Now, I've given you some time to think about this, Robin, and hopefully you got an answer now.
And I didn't think about it.
You know what?
Where do I put him?
All right, well, I'll give you some time to think. I'm going to, if I'm ranking my Australian Survival winners just off seeing this season, without doing a rewatch just yet, I would have to say Mark probably for me goes to he's either number 2 or 3. I grapple with whether I rank Hayley's game over his or whether I rank Mark's game over Hayley's. It's hard for me because I see there has been 4 really strong winners, David,
Yeah.
Mark, Pia, and Haley, I think, are four really strong winners. But I think Mark probably just has that more dominance. He was in control of the game the whole time. I'd probably give him my number two, I would say. Just after David,
Okay.
I'd say he's the second best
I'm
Australian
going to
survivor winner
go.
for what we've
I'm
seen.
going to go because I love David, but I'm actually going to go Pia as my number one, only because that was
Yep.
her first time playing. Whereas David
Yep.
wins on his second time round, Mark wins on his second time round. So I
Mm.
think to win on your first time when you don't have that, you haven't had that experience, I'm going to rate Pia over them, only for that reason, having played once, having got it in that once. And then I would probably do Dave because I just think he was great. And I thought his strategy was it wasn't as subtle as a Mark strategy. It was bold moments. There was some great moments in there. And then I'd probably rate Mark third. So I'll go Pia, Dave, Mark.
Yeah, no, definitely respect that. Mark Griffith here this season had more goats than a farmer's paddock. Badly cast and only 4 to 5 decent players in the whole season. No, Mark, I don't agree. 4 to 5 players in the whole season. Well, more than 4 to 5 players in the whole season. We had Sandra,
List them.
we had Geordie, Jesse. Who else do we have? That's 4 to 5
You've got
players.
4.
Mark and Sam. That's at least 6. Mark. That's at least 6. 6 players there. But no, I do
Haley
think there
was
were
voted out.
plenty of entertaining players. It was just hard with the edit that we got. Ultimately, a lot of players were ultimately shafted. I will quickly share. I did a poll on my YouTube channel this morning. Shameless plug here.
Do it.
But here's what people were saying. How do you rank the winner of Australian Survivor Blood vs. Water? 16% of the vote
I'm on the money.
said that Mark was number 1. 13% saying Mark was number 2. 39% there saying Mark ranks at number 3 in terms of Australian Survivor winners. I do think that the consensus being is it 12% ranking him 6 to 7. Wow, that's there you go.
Yeah, but there's a lot. I'm reading a lot of Mark hate at the moment, and I don't understand what they're seeing. But I think people just, I think a lot of new Survivor fans don't get the game. To be honest with you.
Yeah, a lot of resentment coming towards, I think, just the edit that Mark got, just being such an overbearing edit. And as you say, he's not a David Gannett. He's not as entertaining of a character, at least from what we saw on the edit, which is unfortunate that he's getting so shafted. And I think a lot of that complaint comes down to what Mark points out here. Mark beat a bunch of goats from what we saw in the edit.
This is true. This is true. He did beat goats.
I think that's what is dragging a lot of people's opinion of him, is purely because I think people were so upset with the dominant player dominating throughout the season. It's kind of like the Melbourne Storm in rugby league, winning every single season and people hating them, even though they play so well. They just hate them for their success. And I think that's a similar thing with Mark. Mark interestingly saying, nope, Jesse was a goat too. Sam played him like a puppet. And I will say that is a valid point, but Jesse and Geordie certainly did fire on all cylinders and try to shake things up. He did nothing by himself, and honestly, immaturity was his downfall as he let Sam take his idol. And that was big misplay. And ultimately it saw his torch being snuffed at the end of the day. I will say though, Geordie and Jesse.
Go.
Geordie and Jesse, 2 great players from this season, of course.
Well, Jesse only gets more joy because of his brother Geordie. Jesse was really a non-existent figure, and I think the youth of him. I think what Mark hits on there is that being that bit younger kind of put him out of his depth. It was absolutely foolish. One, to give the idol away and ask for it back. There was plenty of times to ask for it back, surely. Why did he let her stay with it? He comes across like Eric? He comes across like Eric.
Yeah.
From he has that same sort of youthful, inexperience that just got duped. He was an entertaining character to a degree, but only more so because of his brother. I think Geordie really lifts Jesse quite a bit. I don't need to see him back again.
Carlos, I don't think we've seen Carlos in a live this season, but I always see him commenting after the episodes. So great to see him here in the live today. Shout out, boys. I'm just joining the discussion, but would have to agree Mark played a good game from a strategic point to a physical one, and that's why the jury respected the way he played. And certainly I agree with that. Mark really just an all-rounded game. Whereas I think Shay obviously depended more on the physical and fighting her way
Yeah.
from the bottom. Chrissy relied on that loyalty, social aspect. Not Carlos. Mark had the overall
Had a
game,
bit of three. Yeah.
social, strategic, and physical. He really did excel in all three
Yeah.
aspects, and I think
A-
he's a great winner for that reason.
And I guess beating goats, if you're talking about that, you're an idiot to not want to take a goat to the end. Like that whole
Yep.
concept of taking the best person to the end, you want to take the person you can beat. It's $500,000. Like
Yeah, that's
so
Colby
I
Donaldson
think
thinking.
yeah, yeah. It's like why would you want to take anyone who can get, you want to take someone who's going to give them 0 votes and everyone. Mark did the right thing. So beating the goats is again better. Like it's hard. Like were the players as strong as other people? Would he have done that against a Haley or a Dave or some of these more like a Harry, Dirty Harry? Would he be able to play
Mm,
the way he did in that situation? But credit to him for getting the goats to the end. He could have taken Josh, but he chose not to because that was a silly idea because it just runs the risk of him not winning. You don't want it. Like he said, my whole game plan was to win. Who do I beat? I beat the people who can't win. That's why I take him to the end. I guess it's a hard one to go to rank him in that situation where it's like, oh, he beat easy beats. But you know what? They had plenty of time to get rid of him, and no one wanted to. No one wanted to get rid
yeah.
of him because he played a good social game and kept decreasing his threat.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, Mark certainly, as a winner, I can't talk highly enough of the dominant game he played throughout the season. He did a great job. And there were things we didn't touch on, but that's something we'll probably do when we do our Australian Survivor Blood vs. Water retrospective. We will have a
Mm-hmm.
roundtable discussion with some fellow fans of the show. If you guys are interested in joining us for that roundtable, just send us a message on Instagram and we can try and get you guys involved because it'd be really fun just to get you guys involved. We will have some
Yeah,
guests lined up from Reality Pop and other fans from the Australian Survivor community as well, which will be great to see. Certainly, if you guys are interested, let us know. Our Instagram is in the description down below, so just shoot us down there. And I think our email as well is down there. Mark quickly saying, and one last thing I'll say, and Robin can fill in the blanks after the show for you, Riley. In that Shay article, it states that at Final Trouble, Jesse and Geordie told Chrissy and Shay were lucky to be there.
I'll have to read that
If,
article first. I haven't read it.
if only Jesse and Geordie knew how lucky they were to get on the show in the first place. And saying that once cast, Geordie was an absolute delight to watch. He was fantastic. Yep. No, I definitely agree. Geordie was a fantastic character this season.
He
And
was
thank
great
you,
character.
Tioni, for joining us. It won't be the end of our coverage
Yeah,
of the
thank
season,
you.
though, because as I alluded to there, we will have a retrospective coming up on the channel, as well as some exit interviews, some deep dives with some of the castaways. So I'll be
Great.
organizing those over the coming weeks, and certainly make sure you guys subscribe to the channel if you do want to see that. As I said, our socials are in the description down below. My YouTube channel as well, if you want to check that out. I'll post all the I'll post beforehand if we're going to go live on my community tab. So that's another way to keep track of that. And also on my channel, I will have a video on how Mark Wales won this season, a deep dive into his game in the coming weeks. Other than that, as usual, Survivor 42 continues. Tomorrow we have episode 5, I think it is.
4,
Robin,
5? Yeah,
any
5.
predictions on who will be the next to go home?
Oh, Marianne.
Marianne going the next. I think Marianne's going far. I think you'll cop a lot of flack there. Yeah, you're lucky you're on an
I
Australian
know I
Survivor
will.
podcast and
I
not
know I
US
will.
Survivor podcast because I know there's a lot of support for Marianne. But
I think that they alluded to it. They alluded to a Marianne and John. Marianne had something like "Don't hit me," and when John was chopping wood, and a little bit of wood flicked off and hit her. And so
I
I don't
think
know who do they keep.
that's a little bit up. It was the same with
Yeah,
Mike
it's
losing
ridiculous.
his idol the other week, which was all Daniel's fault. So
Yeah,
I might
yeah.
agree with
Oh,
Mike. So I think
Daniel's ridiculous.
Daniel
Yeah,
is on the chopping block at the moment. I would
Daniel
say
is ridiculous.
Roxroy and Romeo as well for me are two that could
Yeah,
potentially go
yeah.
home soon. Yeah, Mark agreeing. Yep, Daniel, you're on your own thinking Marianne. I didn't give you much time to think of that though, so I don't blame you.
No, it's all right.
But Survivor 42.
You're right with Daniel. You,
Yeah,
I just went like, oh, she's the character I remember the most.
yeah. I do like Tori Marcus,
We'll
so I hope that's not the case.
Tori's doing all right. We're not covering that. I'm like you're covering it on your channel. I'm covering it on my channel. But we'll be back, obviously covering South African Survivor when that kicks up as well after all the Blood
Yeah.
vs. Water content is
Yeah,
done.
well, that'll be July, and there will be some off-season
Great.
content for Australian Survivor as well beyond Blood vs. Water. I was talking with you about it before, but we may at some stage do a draft for Australian Survivor versus US Survivor, potentially bringing on some captains, some former castaways. But certainly, as I said, stay tuned to the channel for that. And of course, the Survivor buffs, Gideon and Adam, they will be recapping Survivor 42, Episode 5. A day after the episode, which will be, I suppose, Saturday morning for Australians, Thursday or Friday if you're in the US. We also have Survivor Hot Takes being Coach Drew and Emily also covering the show. So definitely make sure you subscribe for that. And yeah, as I said, if you want to join us for the retrospective, send us a message on our socials and we will hopefully try and chat to you. But as always, guys, it's always a pleasure having you guys join us for these podcasts, commenting live. Marcus, Shmong, Mark Griffith, great to see you. Tioni, Carlos, always great to have all of you guys live. We really do enjoy it. And we'll see you when we come back with some deep dives and a retrospective in the coming weeks. Take care, guys.
Yeah, we'll see you then. Thanks, guys.